Like
right now
you're just like
not,
recording
just not
silence.
connecting the end of the pipe, so which is good. Which basically means we just approved one thing that we already approved, so nothing major is lost. Yep, no, we're actually live. Yep, turns out I have to press the record button too. Alright, so Tim is not here, and you told me that you care about this issue. How about you are?
You explain.
So,
what's SNI?
What's SNI? So, the idea behind SNI is when the client connects to the servers and the server has like more than one hostname assigned to it, the server can tell which hostname is the client trying to connect to and choose the right certificate. So, where the SNI is the SNI is being sent when during the SSL kind of negotiations. So, what's happening is when the client connects to it, the first thing it sends is like a client hello thing. And in the client hello, which is like sent in that plain text, there's the SNA hidden somewhere, and then the server, based on that, chooses the certificate.
I see. So it's basically SSL feature. It's not general HTTP.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
What is it? Server name indication?
Yep. Server name indication.
Do people want to do something like this with regular HTTP? It seems like a generally useful feature. Why is it
so HTTP already had the feature. So if you were just doing HTTP and not HTTPS, you could use the host name and switch on it. But the certificate that comes back from TLS happens before you've sent the host name. So then they added an extension to the protocol to let you send the host name, so the server can send you a certificate, so you can match it against the host name, so you can send the host name.
Okay.
Yeah. So they had to move the data earlier in the negotiation.
I see.
That's
yeah, before you receive the first payload of headers.
Right, and so this is for things like, Azure websites where they're on one computer, they're hosting multiple different things with multiple different certs, and they need to know which one to pick.
So server name indication, so the SSL designed us to be as a generic thing, but being just a host name. So we have we added two APIs. One is the delegate, which defines the callback, which takes a sender and the host name. So sender is actually not being used in the code, but it's kind of like a general thing we use in the SSL stream. So we can pass the SSL stream object to the sender, and the other thing is just in the setting we have the.
So why is it done through options? Why is it not just like a property on SSL stream?
To register the callback, right?
Yeah, why do you need to register a callback as opposed to you just read the property on SSL
Remember,
stream?
we can authenticate as client or as server, or work as client or server on the SSL. So we created the options for server and options for client, because you would have like gazillion of overlaps.
Yeah, I understand that. I remember we created options, but options are kind of like
I'm gonna explain it. So that's mostly out of the kind of the legacy design. So previously, what we chose to there's gonna be only one certificate. So we chose to make a field in the options that there is a server certificate. So essentially, you choose it before you pass the options to the authenticator server API. So since the server name would be set somewhere in between, you would have to have some kind of callback to change it.
Well, that's explanation of the feature, right? Your question was different. Why is it not property?
Yeah.
Why is it options thing? So the option is passed to the main method, where you basically authenticate as client or authenticate as server, or via actually originally it was only via constructor. So we passed all the arguments via constructor. The number of constructor parameters grew up so large that we decided go with the other option, with the options back.
Maybe I totally misunderstood the feature. I thought from the original explanation that it's on the server side, the client, basically the client sends me the host name, and I can detect it on the server side. So this is not options are I pass them in. This is kind of like, you know, I'm getting the option that the client sent me.
Yeah, the problem, the reason it needs to be a callback is the code that wanted to be a TLS server already had to call go be a server now. And that's like it calls authenticated server, and that method does not return until a connection is fully established. But you need to pick the certificate as part of that method. So you need to start authenticated server, then you receive an SNI header,
yes.
Then you need to make a choice, and then you go back, but you're still in this one blocking method.
So if in the past we would choose to, instead of having a server certificate option, like we would choose to have a callback, then we would probably be able to like set a property somewhere. So this way, like the callback would kind of reference to that. But like since we already chose the string, the certificate in the options, then we essentially can change it later.
I see. I see. We now painted ourselves in a bit of a corner, which is the protocol is very complicated. There are lots of things going on, but we don't have APIs for them. But there's an order of them. So we need to now have delegates that basically represent the pieces of code that you would write if the code was actually imperative.
You could as well view it as those are extended.
We basically don't let you write those lines of code.
Yeah.
But there's a block of code that runs kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
And it cannot be just an API on top of a stream.
Yeah. So I mean
because we're handling it, for the customer.
The client model also has a thing like this that uses a callback. Of the client can technically choose a client authentication certificate after the middle of the handshake has started. So
we basically try to hide everything for the user, and then we realize that you cannot hide everything.
Well, the protocol changed.
Yes.
20 years ago, the protocol didn't have any options.
And it has extensibility model, and this is one of the extensions, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, I understand now.
Yeah, that's the flow because of the existing API.
Yeah, so what's going to happen, like if, in the example, client doesn't send the host name, or the host name, I don't know, is invalid or something, for whatever reason, like maybe like a fake client or something, then we choose to call the callback with the new as a host name. And the empty string can never, like you said, never an option, so we never call the empty string.
So when I get the callback, what can I change? Still some properties? Like what?
No, you can return server certificates. You can decide which server certificates to return.
Just the certificate.
Yeah.
And any other, none of the other things can be changed, right?
We don't expect that. Yeah.
Because basically, like, are we sure that the signature that just returns the certificate is the right signature? Because it closes the door for, I want to change some other things.
I don't know about other things they'd want to change. We can always have more callbacks.
Yeah, that's fine.
What do you mean, what door does it close?
Well, let's say, like, at some point we realize, in the middle of this callback, we want to change some other properties on the options.
Military, it's possible.
No, options are static, kind of, they're not per request, right? The options are kind of like general class setting. The callback is invoked per request. So you, in theory, could say like, I want to store some second information, but honestly, if you would want to do that, you would probably hold it on the side, and then somehow associate it, yourself, if you can get actually to the session in the SSL stream.
But that does beg another question, which is the should signatures, right? Because right now we only give you the host and we don't give you access to anything else. Is that intentional? Like, what if you ever want to add some more data points?
It passes this to the first thing.
What is this in the stream? It's the stream, right? It's not the request, right? Well, I guess the stream.
But also, like, since this is a callback, you can technically create a closure and pass a closure to the callback and then change whatever you want.
Well, but I have to create that callback before I have a request, right? So I don't get to capture.
Yes, but like if there is like any data you can change technically, you can have a reference to whatever you want in the callback, right? Because like the callback captures the closure at the moment you pass it.
No, I get that. I'm saying is that my understanding is when you create the options, you do this before you even have a request, right? So I don't have any way to store request-related data in my closure because I only have that once I constructed the whole thing. So if it's not passed to me, I'm screwed. But if I can get it from the sender, then that's fine. Feels a bit of a very heavy-handed backdoor, but I guess it's fine.
Yeah, I think we need to go with it. I mean, I still think that it's kind of weird that, like, underneath there is a protocol that is very imperative, and if they change the protocol, they just say, hey, this new thing is happening, or this new is... Since we kind of hid the whole sequence, the handshake, we kind of have to invent callbacks, they have to have signatures that potentially are limiting, but I guess we are there, so...
Yeah, I mean, if we chose to, design the original APIs as callbacks in general, and then be kind of open-ended, then maybe we'd have some options.
Yeah, I mean the
easy kind of
the underlying APIs are super, complicated. So we feel it for the good reason.
They all take whatever arguments we give them. So they have no, event arcs pattern there, which means every single time I want to add a value, well, kind of screwed. But that would not the first one. That would be at least the third one on the things that are on the option stuff already. So in that case, it's not
in the worst case, if we ever need to add more, we can just add another property like this, another delegate, and then call them both.
Yep.
I mean, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, you just have to decide when the entries conflict.
Well, you would probably say if you said both, it's an error, right? You can either one or the other. When you edit if, you can do that.
Yep, that's true.
And the one question I put it on the open question is should the callback actually give you the string?
So before we jump to that, actually, I want to run by Jeremy. We plan to throw the authentication exception in case when the caller returns null certificate when the callback. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Or if they return null, you can go with whatever they gave you in the constructor.
I mean the certificate.
Yeah. Unless you're throwing right now, if they give you both a callback and a certificate.
Yeah. So currently, I mark these options as incompatible. I can change it, but
that's fine. I mean, if your API says that you can't set both of them,
my opinion is
exactly
if you set both, it's kind of what do you actually want to do?
Yeah. Use it only in error. I think that would be more explicit. So it's more if you know about better exception, if you have opinions on better exceptions in the space.
If it's a thing that the method's already just documented as throwing, then it seems fine. If it's not, then it's probably not.
Is it?
Sorry, what was the question again?
If it's already something we throw from the space.
Is authentication exception a currently documented exception from authenticated server?
I would have to check where this is being thrown exactly. I saw we have only two types of exceptions in the API. So one is valid credential exception or something like that, and the other one is
wouldn't it be cheaper to actually do what Jeremy proposed? So imagine that you basically most of the calls are to the default host, and then you just return null. We already have the certificate because it was passed to options, versus in this design, I always have to return the certificate. And how do I get it? Well, I have to somehow get it, which may be more costly than just using the one that we have in the default options.
I'm not sure
so imagine that basically most of the time you're getting a call to host 1. And that's your default host, and certificate for this one you already provided.
In fact,
so if we can return null, well, most of the time you wouldn't have to do anything in this method. You would just check if hostname equals host1, return null. If we throw an exception in case you return null, you always, even if it's your default host that is called 99.9% of the time, you have to retrieve somehow this certificate and return it. Which may be
store it in static and just return instead of returning null, right? Returning null or static. What's the difference from your callback?
I mean, you have to somehow you have more complicated code. You have to have a static, and you have to you already provided it in the options. Now you have to have a static in addition.
Yeah, you didn't provide it in the options.
Well, I mean, to me, it makes sense to let the options carry the default cert and let SNI replace it, and null means don't replace it. That's how I would write it. But I don't super care. But yeah, it looks like authentication.
Call you in that case. If we know what the default host is, we can just do that and never call you, right?
Well, it's, hey, they said that they would like to connect to APIs of .NET. Do you have a special cert for that? And you say, no. I'm like, all right, I'll use the default. And then they say, hey, I want to talk to beta.apis of .NET. And you're like, oh, you need to use this other cert.
Yeah, the default certificate does not have a hostname associated. You're saying, like, before this delegate is even called, we could check the hostname.
Right.
But we don't have the hostname, I think.
Because you could return it from alpha, beta, but not gamma, let's say, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would like, if you like Apache with their SNI setup, you can tell them this is the default, and then if the host is this, use this guy. If it's this, use this guy. So
yeah, this is just basically this delegate would be to override the default.
Yeah,
it would not be give me a certificate for host.
So again, I think it's, and then it's less change on a collar of existing stuff. If they're passing in the thing that they're passing in right now becomes the default using the way that they're passing it in, and then if they want to set
what if they want to fail the authentication?
They can throw an exception. Turns out if they throw an exception,
if
you'll throw it.
If you send a callback and then the certificate is null, then you throw essentially. That's what we.
No, you explicitly throw. You check if hostname equals host1, throw authentication exception. If you want to fail.
Yeah, well, I mean, or default throw or whatever.
So you're saying basically you already have server certificates, so you're not introducing a new one. You would just say if I return null, I mean return that one.
I think that makes more sense as a caller. But I don't have a strong opinion. Yeah, I don't have a super strong opinion. Like, it goes back to Christoph's, like, maybe you're now causing a capture to exist. In fact, you're maybe having to use a delegate or a delayed lookup, or a lambda instead of a delayed lookup words. You have to either use a lambda where you've captured a variable, or use a delayed lookup every time the callback gets fired, or go to a static when what you really wanted to do was, I'm the initializer, go do all the stuff I want, set the default, move on with life, and I don't want another closure to get captured. I just want to do the implicit go call this static function that I wrote. So by requiring someone to provide the default on every call, instead of letting them pass it in your other options, you're forcing them to create closures.
Well, no, as Carol said, if it's in static, you don't need to provide closure. But I think statics have the problem that they are kind of dangerous. Correct? Like, random code can change it. I mean, it's...
Yeah, so...
You have to have an additional static field that otherwise you would not have.
But, I mean, if somebody does something in their callback, they're going to have to either have looked it up for other hosts or have their own callbacks or their own bound variables or whatever, so it doesn't
super
matter.
In the normal case, you would allocate the options in the same instance you allocate the SSL string, right? It basically means you're doing both of them per request. So if I don't want to do that, I have to store the options in a static, right?
Yeah, the question is, when the callback fires, do you want to have had a capture or a closure captured over the function that you were in?
What I'm saying is that in practical terms, when we talk about statics are dangerous, in order for me to avoid an allocation per request, I have to take the entire options into a static. Like just doing the one callback doesn't help you, right?
You don't call it per request or per new session.
You call authenticated server and it's set up, and then
it's set up, and it's kind of like is handling incoming, session starts, and for each or requests or whatever, right? Request for new session, and each of them will call the callback.
What do I call it again? Don't I create a stream and then I call authenticated server or authenticated client on that stream? Isn't that per instance effective?
Oh yeah, because you have to give it the network stream that it's operating on, which means if the network stream gets closed, you have to make a new object wrapping the new network stream. They can renegotiate a session, except they can't in TLS 1.3 because they got rid of it because it's a stupid feature. So
you just basically change
the
amount of stuff you put into the static, right? That's what I'm saying. You could imagine it's a higher layer or something, and you pass down the options.
Yeah. So again, like it really feels like 601, half dozen of the other. It doesn't matter.
The first thing I'm fine with either behavior. It's just what you prefer now to mean.
ask ASP.NET team if they have preference, because honestly, this is feature for them. Almost nobody else will gonna use it ever. So.
But it feels weird to me that. To me, I would feel that the callback return null means do whatever you wanted to do, instead of you should throw an exception now because I return null.
I find it weird that when we have this server certificate that we suddenly use it as default when I have the callback. So which one has precedence, and you have to think about that. If you basically say like, we have to choose which one to use, it's kind of crystal clear. Like either I have static callback, which is here's the certificate, versus here's the callback. Right. So yeah.
I mean, plus
different opinions.
We can actually change it. Like if you ever find this is like a problem or something, I don't know, we can change it.
All right. The other interesting thing here actually is host name.
Compatible options at this point. So like
String versus read-only span of chart.
So before we go there, so what's our decision here? Do we go with that proposal, or do we go with?
Ask ASP.NET team.
So we just ask caller or whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Doesn't change the surface, but does change the exception model.
Yep. Right. They know better how they use it and like what's more convenient for the users. So
yeah, because they own the SSL stream and not the thing they're hosting, they would need to understand how they want their own configuration model to play it. Like the ASP.NET site is never going to see this because Kestrel or whatever took care of it. Yep.
Alright, so your thing, hostname, what was that?
Hostname string versus read-only span, because by the in the spec it's basically string bytes. It's called in RFC. By the way, we had a similar discussion around LPN when we had do we go with string versus are we gonna pass read-only span of bytes? The difference is that if we pass string, we have to do encoding and other stuff, Punicode and that stuff. If it's read-only span, which means in theory we have to allocate per new established connection, unless we cache it in future. And read-only span of bytes, over there we basically leave all the decoding and coding on the caller, which is kind of pushing it up the stack a little bit and less user.
But you do it once and then you kind of.
No, but I don't understand why you even need to do transcoding at all. You just compare it to the bytes that you
on the wire. So that's the thing, there's one way what you get over the wire, which there's the Punicode dash something whatever. I've never seen that.
So there is a reason you might sometimes wanna do transcoding either way. So I kind of read more spec like yesterday. So what the spec says in some cases it's defined that you should do case insensitive comparison for the names. There are cases where you have to. What the spec says, if the string is ASCII only, then you need to do case-insensitive comparison. But it doesn't define what you should do for if it contains non-ASCII characters. But in the most of the cases, I think the client is already going to do that for you, so the byte comparison should be enough. So that in the most cases, you're not going to allocate this idea.
Even ASP.NET team, as this Chris Ross was voting for string. People like Tim Seaborg were voting as on LPN for the read-only span of bytes. Their motivation for the read-only span is, in my opinion, performance. That you don't have to, in theory, allocate per stream. For which I think that if we ever find that it's a problem, we can always cache, because you're not going to get 10,000 different SNIs, right? On the server, you're gonna get maybe 10, maybe 2, I don't know, some number. We can have a cache of hey, if you see these bytes, it's this string, right? So you don't have to allocate in theory.
Caches like this just make our framework more complicated.
That's true.
You could do one thread local static of what's the last one I got.
Or that.
It still makes it more complicated.
I'm not saying that we're going to implement that, but I'm saying that we have a escape route for the if the allocation per class matters.
So it's C#. People want to write switch hostname case beta.apis.net : return beta cert.
That's true, but SSL stream, like if you're using SSL stream, you're already low level.
It's C#. Developers will expect that they can write a switch statement. You can't write a switch statement on a read-only span of bytes. So I think we should just return string, and it's going to be low enough. Like, yes, it's not non-allocating, but it's low, and it'll be gen 0. And
not allocating?
It is not allocating. But
say it's allocating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we
face it. It's allocating. You don't want to say the word.
Well, I mean, like we've been doing a bunch of stuff. We've been doing a bunch of things
that are allocating, and you say not allocating.
We've been doing a bunch of things that are non-allocating. This violates that principle, but it maintains what C# users expect. So.
And it violates your engineering aesthetics to allocate. So you say not allocating.
We don't think about allocations. Allocations are free, man. It's just a pointer increment. That's what I learned.
Yeah, but then we're gonna store it in a hash and allocate and basically compute the hash table every time we retrieve it. And
so you have to like read the memory.
So yeah,
if not for the casing issue, I would say let's just go for a span. Given that we have the casing issue, I don't feel as strongly.
Yeah, I mean, if the TLS protocol called out explicitly that you must send the lowercase and it must be Punycode, so everything is legitimately ASCII, and therefore anybody who's not doing that is wrong, then I would say bytes is reasonable.
They're not specifying that you should Punycode. What they say is that this is an UTF-8 encoded string, and that you should it cannot contain certain characters, and then you should do decoding of unified characters. But it doesn't say it cannot contain.
Right. So
I think
if
they
it
changed
said
the spec at one point, so I think they support both.
If it said must be Punycode or must be ASCII or Punycode and must be lowercase, then I would say send the bytes. Otherwise, send the string. It's also going to be terrible for anybody who cares about doing IDNA because they're theoretically going to have to either run it through the Punycode decoder manually, or they're going to have to switch on both the UTF-8 and the Punycode value, which fun times.
By using a different data type, how do we avoid the problem? Isn't that effective?
Well, it's already string, so now they can switch on string to lowercase, so they can correct the fact that the spec was stupid.
So you're saying you just put the burden on the person to decide which policy you want to use for your stuff.
I mean, alternatively, we can always run it through the Punycode decoder before we call the callback, but that's a functional decision.
Yeah, so one thing we could do, it's not crazy, we could just in place change the bytes to lowercase, assuming ASCII. But that maybe gets into too much magic.
Yeah, I was going to say, the moment that somebody sends a capital Greek gamma, not Punycode encoded, I don't know what we do.
That's not ASCII. That already doesn't follow the spec, so we just throw an exception. The conversion is actually relatively inexpensive, and we have an implementation, but I don't know.
So what I understand is like, even if you use string, like why is span worse? Because like at the end you still say the caller is responsible for handling it the way they want to, right?
Well, because it's super convenient to say to lower. When you have a read-only span of byte, as I said, we have an API to do it. It's not so convenient and so foolproof.
Why don't we have read-only span of char? That I thought we had it to lower.
Well, that one is not read-only span of char.
I'm confused.
They said byte.
Read-only might give you read-only. But if we can give you a string, it can give you read-only span of char, right? Like that.
Well,
that would cause an allocation, so we may as well give you a string. The moment we convert from UTF-8 to UTF-16, we allocating buffer.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So this is single byte characters turning into multi-byte characters, so they want to send the bytes and not the...
Okay, the only benefit you don't have, you can do the to lower place rather than
then you can switch.
And the switch thing. Yeah. I just like that's
so. I would also don't understand how important is this allocation here. Like
one request essentially.
Yeah, but 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 2.
I don't have the
because if it's 1 out of 2, maybe we should go with the read-only span of bytes. If it's 1 out of 1,000, then we should go with a string.
Well, it's probably given how much this stuff probably allocates. I'm pretty sure it's not 2. I'm not sure it's 1,000, but I would go with 1 and 2.
It may or may not be the tipping point to force a Gen 0 collection on every request.
I mean, hostnames are usually like under what?
But 1 out of 1,000.
Like,
What?
I mean, hostnames are probably under 30 characters for the most part, right? Like,
I think the limit is like 63 or something.
I mean, in theory, I don't know. Like, is there any limit on like how much nesting you can have and like how long it can get? Probably not. But like,
I mean, URI will have one, which means that.
I mean, in theory, principle like 30
So,
is okay. But
I'm okay with either solution.
Yeah.
The way I would do it, I would measure what's the percentage added to a request because of the allocation. Not even measure, just like guesstimate. Somebody who understands how the code works and how much it allocates.
12 bytes.
If it basically, adds 100% to the existing allocations, then I would go with a span. If it adds 1%, then let's just take the string.
ASP.NET asks for string.
I think strings.
I think they are not concerned about that.
I think strings the more natural thing. I can understand byte or the read-only span of byte, but I think that'll just. I think the read-only span of byte would push people away, or every answer on Stack Overflow, or the answers on Stack Overflow will be, here's how you turn it into a string, and then you can use it in the switch statement, which means we should have just done it that way. Granted, that means that they can be 0 allocation if they want to, but I think we should just go with the string. And if we find out later, we can make a new callback.
Yep, that's another option.
And look, they had to allocate a callback. So
The callback is allocated once per app.
depends on how they do it, but yeah.
Well, if they're stupid, of course.
Well, no, if they do the very sensible thing, a C# 2.0 spec bug does the wrong thing.
Do I want to know more?
If you invoke if you pass a delegate by passing the name of a static function, it has to create a new delegate object every time you do that, instead of creating one static field that it references every
Lovely.
time. Because of the words "the same as" in the spec. It says this is the same as new delegate type of whatever. New has an allocating side effect. And for some reason, Jared has
Another thing that this will be as well, like, similar to LVN from the perspective, and if somewhere we should save, allocations and that stuff, we probably, on both client side and server side as well. So.
Yeah, I think that before this kind of thing gets spanified, you'd essentially be redesigning the entire SSL stream class.
And that's quite possible as well.
Like, you'd need to start over with the idea of having it as the very low overhead, and you'd probably just end up with a parallel type.
And SSL stream is kind of on our watch list to give some love to.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Then just said who opens a second callback is always viable. Yes, that is true, but
Yep.
and you can always just fork the entire .NET platform. You don't
Of course.
It is open
Back
source.
up that on
Someone
daily
can
basis,
fix
so
it.
it's easy, right?
Yeah.
It's always an option. All right, so then let me just. So we're going with the current shape. That means I don't have to do much.
I guess, as a practical question, you've vetted that the callback model works on all your platforms?
I'm testing this right now, but it should work.
Why would it not work on
I've checked if I'm getting the right bytes on Linux and Windows. OS X I have not yet.
I'm just making
parsing the client hello directly.
just making sure that all of the different libraries that we're using allow you to have started the server thing without specifying the server cert and to specify it later via a callback.
Right. Interesting. That's a good point.
Like because Tim's comment at the end was S-channel takes in an array of certificates. So if any platform needs it as pre-handshake setup, you can't do this model at all.
That's actually really good.
So you have a
pass a table to options, not a callback.
So
return
this
callback,
is fine if you can make it work. If you can't make it work, you better find out soon because you need to come back with a new proposal.
Which actually, okay, even if let's assume that it would work, this callback model. Wouldn't it be a better model if you basically, when you create the options,
You gave it a dictionary?
you give it a dictionary?
You can't make that non-allocating.
I know, but at least it kind of like, it took me like 5 minutes to understand why are we doing this callback. And basically my confusion was that we have an option, like when you create the thing, you pass all the options, it knows everything about the handshake.
So you want dictionary of string to certificate and null as the key is the default?
No, if you pass basically maps from mapping from host to
but the
if the host name is not specified.
So try get value thingy returns false. So then you say try get value null, and then that's the default certificate. And
but having said that, I mean, I don't know if we want.
If you want to put one of the servers on the maintenance mode for 5 minutes, then you can do it with the dictionary, right? I mean, technically you could, because you can pass the dictionary.
I mean, again, like with the reminder that you have to make a new SSL stream object and you have to call authenticated server every single connection that comes in, you just change your dictionary. So, especially if you keep a reference to the dictionary, because you can do whatever you want and totally destroy the behavior of this class. So, start dynamically replugging away things.
But I don't, it's just an idea. So whoever implements the.
If you like I understand the callback because it has synergy with the client model. And if you find a platform that can't do it, then you're going to have to change it to a dictionary input.
Absolutely.
So
this feature, especially in 2.1, is if we can make it and if we can make it in time. So we're not going to push in crap that doesn't work.
S channel, there might be.
I mean, Tim had a comment that says S channel expects it as an array of certificates. It's possible they have two modes, one with a preset map and the other with a callback. But I can't tell you off the top of my head if Apple's going to let you do this, and I can't tell you off the top of my head if OpenSSL is going to let you do this. So.
What? You had one job. What's wrong with you?
My one job is to point out to other people the risks that they have to take into consideration. I'm a principal now. My job's not to do any work. It's to tell other people what work to do.
Are you getting into the snarky department as well? Like fighting Barry off or something like that?
No, I was going to say,
promoted to a PM.
I've been like CIO of the snark department the whole time I've worked here. So.
I think snarkiness is a minimum. Where are you? All right. So I think that's it because this one is not ready, and then we're done for today. So I put that down to things in the milestone, which.
I assume that is the correct one because the only other one. Well, that one before we go, we're running out of time. That's going to actually be a breaking change.
Developer?
Yeah, we're not going to take it.
I know. I'm pushing on Fowler.
Yeah. So
Pushing or pushing?
Out of the hours and hours and hours of meetings we've had so far on Memory of T, we so far have decided we're renaming retain that takes a bool to the pin. Okay.
Well, and
We'll go through .NET Core ship.
And remove.
And then remove retain and release. Yeah. So there we go. It's now been talked about in this meeting.
Yeah, I actually. So interestingly, we are kind of running out of time. It would be good if we reviewed the changes because basically there's a subset of changes that we agreed to, and there's another subset that is still being discussed, and Fowler again is going back and forth. I'm glad that he's now. Yeah, I know. I'm glad that he's now agreeing with me, but it's kind of. I almost was happy that I was the only person opposing one of the proposals, because if I'm the only one, I get overruled and we move forward. Now Fowler agrees with me. It just throws a wrench into the whole discussion.
Like a voice from the off saying, achievement unlocked.
Is that what it is?
Sounds like it. So I think the only other thing that, we should probably take all the freaking hardware proposals and group them together at some point because there's a lot of them. So does anybody have a timeline for that? Carol, do you know?
It's not 2.1, that's what I know.
But it's not 2.1, I know, but like how urgent is it for whatever the next version is?
No idea. You're asking the wrong person.
Okay.
You have to talk with Carol and Eric, and honestly, I'm gonna look at you as well because I don't know how the Intel Intrinsics went. I think that.
Talk to Rich, I think, because I have no idea what. I mean, I know it's a lot of APIs, and we pulled them partially because it was a lot of APIs, and we didn't feel like we got enough coverage on them. But I think we need to probably front load this if we want to get any sort of like feedback on those. And I think it seems like we need to almost have a standalone NuGet package that people can install over.
Which we already do. We already have a preview package with all these things, so they can give it a try.
I know that we agreed on that. I didn't know we actually already.
I think that what they were doing is they put everything in a namespace that had experimental in it to indicate that
we had,
will not ship in the next version.
What the thing is, but anyway, like I think it needs some advertisement, some blog posts or whatever, right?
Sure. On top of that, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, they seem to know that nothing's been reviewed, and every single noun they have may get rewritten by the time that they go to full production.
I think the hardware intrinsics one, like I think naming wise, it's mostly straightforward, as in like whatever messed up name this thing has, we just spell it out. But it's mostly about the design of like how we broke down the specs into types and see whether that's a programming model that actually works out in practice, right? But I think for the most part, someone can do APIs.
Yeah, I mean some of the ones that I've seen, I think that the attempt to try and take the short name of the manufacturer documented assembly instruction and try and make it a long name actually makes it harder to understand.
Yeah, that's the other thing that
when essentially because some of the ones for like the SHA-1 and SHA-2 processing, where it's this instruction got broken in two pieces because the register is only so wide, and it's like trying to describe that as like first half and second half. It's probably just better to just name it the opcode.
I mean, honestly, like I think I'm holding up to this because that's exactly what we did in Recommit as well, right? We did not call them fancy names. We just said this is, LDC I3, right?
Yep.
Like you just have to.
It's like if you want to know what LDC I3 does, hit F1.
I don't know what Christos thinks about that, but I think, like, honestly, the purpose of API design naming is mostly predictability more than anything. And like, if you can look up things because you don't know what the fucking opcode is called on Intel.
Yeah. So for intrinsics, I think that we possibly want to violate all of our naming rules and just write it down exactly the way that the assembly is named. So lowercase, bad, drop most of the vowels. Etc. It's like if Intel calls this like SHL32A, then like we should just call it SHL32A.
Yeah, I mean casing I think is,
but
casing we could tweak. The negative of trying to tweak casing is sometimes it's not clear what the casing should be, and then we are wasting a lot of time trying to decide what the casing should be.
Yeah.
But we could. I mean, casing does not impact searchability. Like you can.
Right. I think that we should have good C# names on the namespace, and if we want to do the bundling of things of like, this is the SSE instruction set, then we have like, this is SSE, which really means all of these opcodes should light up together, so you have one, is SSE available question, and like, there are things that we can do around that to be good, but when it comes to the individual opcodes, I probably am more in favor of writing down whatever is going to be in the processor manual.
But still, I would say that we should look at few.
Yeah.
And if it's clear how we would Pascal case it, we should just do it.
Yeah.
If we kind of like, whoa, I don't know how to Pascal case this weird, set of characters because they are neither words nor acronyms, then probably we should just use what it says.
Yep.
What did we do for it? I think it's mostly like we only capitalized the first one. I'm not sure Recommit is an API that is worth emulating in all cases, but what's it called? I don't know, right? No, it's not called opcode because codes. Well, I guess we kind of had an easy thing here because basically we capitalize everything that comes after an underscore or the first start that. So
there are underscores.
Yeah, because, it turns out in second name.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think that's actually how they call it in IL. So in IL, these are, I think, dots, right? I think IL is dot separated. And for obvious reasons, we could not do that. Yeah. We could have probably just not used an underscore. That would have probably worked.
Yeah, so we get.
But you see, this one is it is kind of Pascal case.
It is predictable, right? Like if you know the pattern, you know it's called all lowercase move dot obf.
But for example, look, there's ref any type.
See that?
Ref any type. Just type ref any type.
You mean make ref any?
Yeah.
No, that one is also the same issue. It's basically it's several words, but we don't Pascal case them all. We just pretend it's a single word.
So you would capitalize R and A?
No. I think this basically, if we said this is our convention, we just capitalize the first one. We treat it as a weird word.
Yeah.
It kind of would look more C-sharpy, but we wouldn't have to spend like. Should it be uppercase M, lowercase k, uppercase R, uppercase A, or MK should be both uppercase?
Because like we get
we don't want to spend hours and hours. This
SHA-1, I guess it's probably SHA-1 next E, but like SHA-1 NEXTE. It's like I actually read that as SHA-1 NXE because like I'm used to X being on the end of that.
Well, but since
SHA-1 message 1, SHA-1 message 2, and that's the I need bigger registers.
All right. So then let me stop the streaming. I think we're done for today.
So should we
Goodbye,
talk about the memory changes?
Sure.
Because we need to like do them as soon as possible.
Yeah, I wanted to review the whole.
So
I missed last week's meeting because
even if we don't like formally approve it now, let me guys give you like an overview of what's happening. So then possibly leave
Did you shut down?
Send an email and approve it in email.
This is another breaking change.
This is a breaking change.
Emo, did you shut
What do
down?
you mean by another?
We should shut down.
Already had a few, right?
When?
Let me do this and
the
see you guys later.
had to react to a few things in the last.